This is a map of the Strait of Hormuz on February 28, 2026. It shows hundreds of ships passing through right before the US and Israel attacked Iran. And Iran attacked ships. By the next day, no ship risked going through the strait, except for an odd few. The Hilda 1 turned off its location responder, then reappeared on the other side. The Kuma followed, flying what the EU says is a fake Guyanese flag. Then the Skywave switched its flag from Comoros to Botswana before crossing. Their strange behavior isn't random. It's the signature of a strategy that has helped Iran, Russia, and other regimes survive the West's attempts to shut them out of the world economy. Some call it the Dark Fleet, or the Ghost Fleet. Most call it
Shadow Fleet.
Shadow Fleet.
Shadow Fleet.
A growing shadow fleet is causing concern.
Sailing without a valid flag.
To evade Western sanctions.
To smuggle oil as well as sometimes weapons.
While some are suspected of acts of sabotage.
The Shadow Fleet is not a unified group. It's a loose collection of aging and fraudulent ships, secretly ferrying sanctioned oil around the world. But despite every attempt by the West to stop it, the Shadow Fleet keeps growing. And now it's out in the open.
The Dark Fleet is the lifeblood of these regimes. It's shown bad actors how easy it is to keep trade flowing.
So what makes the Shadow Fleet so effective? And how is it taking advantage of all the chaos in the Middle East? Tens of thousands of ships carry goods all around the world every single day. And most operate within a system that relies a lot on trust. A ship is trusted when it can show more or less three things. First, what I'll casually call paperwork, proof of legitimate ownership, management, and insurance. Second, a flag, showing it's registered and overseen by a country. And third, a so-called AIS transponder, which broadcasts where it is and where it says it's going. Because ships with all three are far more likely to be accepted by most major ports, every country's economy depends on them. Economic sanctions exploit that dependence. In the 2000s, the UN sanctioned North Korea for testing a nuclear weapon, and the US and EU sanctioned Iran for trying to make one. Sanctions led major ports to block ships flagged by North Korea and Iran, or whose transponders showed they'd been there. Sanctions also blocked them from getting legit paperwork. Without trusted ships, North Korea and Iran's economies suffered. But neither gave in because buyers in some countries, like China, were still willing to do business, as long as they could plausibly deny it. So North Korean ships began turning off their transponders before entering Chinese ports, or out to sea to transfer their cargo to another ship. They also began switching their North Korean flags to so-called flags of convenience.
That's meant going to flags like Cameroon, Cook Islands, Gabon, finding flag states that operate privately and don't have much scrutiny or technical oversight.
Michelle Wise-Bachmann is a maritime intelligence analyst. She explained that getting false paperwork was pretty easy too.
I've tracked down the so-called registered owners to a carpet mall in Dubai and a shopping mall in Mumbai, a pharmacy in Moldova. All of these extremely subterfuge activities, they've all happened because there were chinks in the regulation.
These were the first shadow vessels. Soon Iran was using the same tricks to hide its oil tankers, and cleverly adding more.
They would get a really old clunky ship and they would send it to a shipyard that wouldn't ask too many questions, of course. Then the old tanker would become a new tanker without the taint of sanctions.
By the late 2010s, the Shadow Fleet consisted of a few dozen vessels, mostly exporting Iranian oil to China. When Venezuela was hit with US sanctions, it added ships. Then a few stateless ships joined too. Crews developed more tricks like spoofing their locations and changing flags, names, even paint colors mid-journey. While shadow vessels make themselves very hard to find, they do occasionally turn on their transponders, which allows analysts like Michelle to find, investigate, and label them. In a report by Vortexa, the Shadow Fleet included around 200 vessels in early 2022. But just 1 year later, it jumped to over 1,000. Most belong to Russia. After invading Ukraine, Vladimir Putin's regime was hit with US and EU sanctions. So it bought hundreds of aging tankers and ran the Shadow Fleet playbook to keep its oil moving, mostly to buyers in China and India. Then it used the revenue to fund its war. By late 2025, this growing Shadow Fleet was carrying around 11% of the world's seaborne oil, allowing these states to survive sanctions. And even though European countries could see it sailing by, there was very little they could do.
All ships have what's called the right of innocent passage under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Seas, which has allowed, especially in the case of Russian dark fleet vessels, for them to go through the coastal waters, the English Channel, Danish Straits, etc., to load Russian oil.
The Shadow Fleet looked untouchable, which made it not just an effective economic tool, but also an effective weapon.
Right now, Donald Trump is threatening to pull the U.S. out of NATO because other countries aren't helping him in Iran. Now, what's interesting is how different outlets are covering it. This level of insight is only possible thanks to the sponsor of this week's episode. That's Ground News. Ground News is the only website and app that doesn't just gather news from all over the world. It shows me how they're being covered, whether that's political bias, reliability, or even ownership. Now, there are about 470 outlets covering this story. Ones on the right are emphasizing how this is a wake-up call and blame NATO's so-called weakness for putting it in this situation, while outlets on the left focus on how Trump's threat is him lashing out over an unpopular war. The Ground News interactive map feature also lets me browse stories from all over the world, including some that may be overlooked by Western media. My job isn't just to know what is being covered, but how. Ground News makes that easier, and I bet that my viewers want the same level of transparency. So we've partnered with Ground News to give you 40% off their Vantage plan. That's what I use every day. That's at ground.news/searchparty or scan the QR code. Ground News and Search Party share the same mission. That's to make the news more transparent and understandable for everyone. Thanks again to Ground News for their support, and I'll take you back to the story.
On Christmas Day 2024 in the Baltic Sea, 4 underwater cables were suddenly damaged. Authorities quickly discovered it happened while a very old oil tanker passed over them. The Eagle S was flagged by the Cook Islands, owned by a company in the UAE, and filled with Russian oil. Finnish police discovered it had dragged its anchor on the seabed for nearly 90 kilometers, damaging the cables. The ship's crew said it was an accident. But it was just one of several undersea cables that had suffered damage while a sketchy vessel passed by. These incidents have led authorities to believe that Russia was using its Shadow Fleet to sabotage and spy on NATO countries.
I've spoken to people who are in a position to know that yes, spying equipment has been found on these vessels, and there are now security guards on vessels linked to the former paramilitary group Wagner. So the blurring of commercial and military especially has been quite substantial.
Russia is very good at using tactics that fall below the threshold of war, that are easily denied and very hard to prosecute.
When Finland charged the crew of the Eagle S with sabotage, a court dismissed the case, ruling that it didn't have jurisdiction. Evading sanctions and staging acts of sabotage was a step too far. Around 2024, the West ramped up sanctions not on countries, but on ships. A lot of ships. At least 1,304 vessels have been sanctioned by at least one of these governments, which makes them riskier to do business with.
It made the oil harder to sell, meant that the oil producers, they set up a few more sock puppet companies in order to evade those sanctions and to develop the workarounds.
It also forces them to travel longer routes to avoid inspections and transfer their loads more often. But sanctions alone don't stop shadow vessels. So the US and EU pressured flag of convenience states to unflag sanctioned vessels, making them stateless. This was a game changer, because under international law, a ship suspected of being stateless can be boarded.
U.S. forces seizing an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela.
Special forces rappelling down and then taking control of the tanker.
This problem had been bubbling away for most of 2025 with lots of hand-wringing, let's say, from European governments about what to do. And then bang, you've got the US government come in and say, look, you can seize them because they're stateless. That provided a template to European governments. And so now we're seeing action.
In early 2026, the US, France, and even India seized stateless vessels. Then the US and EU announced sanctions that led some countries to buy less Russian oil. Meanwhile, Ukraine went even further.
Ukrainian sea drones launched their attack on a pair of oil tankers, part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet.
Ukraine has hammered Russia's Baltic ports, halting some oil exports.
By February 2026, Russian oil revenue was falling, and Iran was selling its oil for bargain prices. The West was making progress against the shadow fleet, right up until the US and Israel attacked Iran, and Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. While the strait was closed, the price of the oil inside every tanker rose dramatically. But by letting mainly shadow vessels through, Iran made sure it was mainly shadow vessels that could profit from it. In late March, the Kuma and the Hilda 1 sailed east, probably towards China like most Iranian shadow vessels. And after Donald Trump eased sanctions on Iranian and Russian oil at sea, Russian shadow vessels raced towards India. Other countries placed orders too. Now Russia and Iran are again exporting a lot of oil. According to the FT, Russia made more than $150 million a day in extra revenue, while Iran likely made more than $140 million a day. All largely thanks to the shadow fleet.
They've really got a free pass to ship whatever they can, wherever they can.
While I'm recording this, Iran is still in control of the strait. But after peace negotiations failed, Trump ordered the US Navy to impose its own blockade on the strait to intercept Iranian ships. Meanwhile, European states keep intercepting stateless vessels. But many ships are switching to Russian flags, which makes them harder to seize. It again leaves the West in search of a strategy. So, what else can it do?
If you want to stop the next generation of dark fleet vessels, then perhaps have a phase out of vessels when they reach 25 years. And there are states like Malaysia, for example, where there are these dark fleet tankers in their economic exclusive zones that are undertaking activities that are contrary to international regulations. They could bring up an enforcement campaign there. There's all sorts of small ways to chip away at the problem, but ultimately it lies with improving regulation at the international level.
While the West struggles to fight the shadow fleet, the war in Iran proved it to be even more useful and more valuable than ever.
All right, thanks so much for watching another episode of Search Party. I want to take a minute to tell you quickly about newpress.com. A lot of the reporting I did for this story wouldn't have been possible without help from New Press members. Chinmay Mehta, John Bibb, Kara Kuhlman, John Cadella. These are New Press members who really helped me find ways to track down some of these actual vessels. Now, there's a lot more going on at newpress.com. You have director's commentaries, you have more story prompts, you have opportunities to pitch stories to me. So I encourage you to head over to newpress.com, join the conversation. So I look forward to seeing you there, and I'll see you in a couple weeks back here for the next episode of Search Party. All right, thanks very much.